As we kickstart this edition of EVConIndia, I, on behalf of Blue Circle, would like to take a few moments to thank all our esteemed partners for putting their shoulders to the event. A special thanks to our main sponsors, Log9 Materials and Hero Electric, knowledge partners, Alvarez and Marcel for creating the white paper, investment partner, Indian Angel Network for co-authoring the Starter Brev program, accelerator partner, Huddle, and real estate partner, JLL. It's been an absolute pleasure working with their teams and getting their valuable support. Also, a big shout out to all my team members for working all the hours to pull this off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, distinguished audience, for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many among them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue. For those of you who are new with us today, India-based startup Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific opportunity and knowledge exchange networking app for business leaders. It's somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 15,000 plus rapidly growing community of like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, exchange high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across 20 sectors such as e-mobility, renewable energy, real estate, healthcare, and many more. Those leaders among you who are interested, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section, and we'll soon be sending out invitations to our new guests post today's discussion. Coming back to today's discussion, it's a privilege and a pleasure to welcome today's keynote speaker, who is handpicked because of the Think input and the rich experience he brings in. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Salman Husaain. Salman Husaain is the co-founder and CEO of Fuse, an innovative firm that is retrofitting cars from petrol to electric. His first MVP is a Beetle conversion, which offers all modern conveniences of cars along with classic car styling. He's also working on a world first Nissan petrol EV vehicle, which will soon be launched. Salman is the Chief Product Officer for EV Lab, the omni-channel retail concept by Chalhob that aims to bring a selection of electric vehicles to consumers of the UAE. Through strategic partnerships, consulting, community engagement, engineering, and market leadership, his companies are laying the groundwork for the dramatic changes that are bearing fruit for the region. Being in the UAE for over 25 years, he has a deep connection to the UAE and has firsthand witnessed the changes in transforming the city into regional hub of the MENA and increasingly a beacon of sustainability. He was the first private owner in the UAE of the Renault Zoe in 2016, having driven more than 6 years exclusively with electric vehicles and having covered more than 200,000 kilometers. So this is a bit about Salman. And now coming into the topic, the discussion will revolve around the topic need for retrofits in the industry to accelerate the adoption of EVs. Now I request Salman to please begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gautam, for the introduction. I really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I am now the CEO of Fuse, and what we're doing is trying to retrofit electric cars from petrol to electric. And I just had a little presentation to show you guys. So let me just start that. Today, I'm speaking a little bit about the need for EV retrofits as a solution for e-mobility. So as you know, that there is climate change is happening right now. Transport is a massive emitter for greenhouse gases. 1/5 of all CO2 that's emitted is through ground transport. Obviously, we have a lot of missing segments in the market as well that we need to address. So even though you're seeing cars like Tesla, like Rivian in the market, there are still gaps for commercial vehicles, for big heavy duty trucks, even though we're seeing the Tesla, for example, coming out with a semi, it's not yet released. And the fact that we're on a clock, India, in fact, has a 2030 EV adoption policy of about 30%. And so we're not going to meet those goals with just new EV sales. We need to add to those sales. And I think that retrofit is one of the answers. How it will look like, most likely, our adoption curves for Indian market adoption is something similar to this. So you have the two-wheelers, the three-wheelers, And what we think is that you can take about 20 to 30% of that market in just retrofit. So that's a huge market, something along the lines of 20 to 30 billion USD just in the Indian market alone. It's a very basic thing what we do. A retrofit just basically involves taking out the engine and the petrol tank. So that's the petrol drivetrain. Then adding in the components that I've realized here. That would be the motor controller, the battery, and that BMS system, which manages it, the charger and socket, and then the DC-DC converter, which keeps the 12-volt running. So you don't actually strip out the 12-volt systems. You leave them be and you just power them through another converter system. That keeps the whole powertrain simple, and you can retrofit a wide range of vehicles, all the way from two-wheelers to four-wheelers and more. Obviously, I've mentioned that it can address the gap faster, and the way they do that specifically is the fact that when you buy a new EV, obviously it's still price sensitive. We think that we can hit between 40 to 60% of the cost of buying a new vehicle by retrofitting it. And so that obviously brings down your CapEx to significantly lower. But then there's also the idea of having it customized. A lot of the Indian market, the products that are released are maybe in the 100 to 200 kilometer range. Sometimes you may not need that, and you can save money by going on a lower battery, on lower voltages. And so that's something that you can really do by customizing the solution for you. You can reduce the costs to you. And obviously upcycling vehicles is great, because the scrappage scheme is something that's being looked at, and that's something that we can save from the scrapyard. Mining of materials for steel and all the other materials that are used for the body and the drivetrain are still there, and that we can save on that by reusing our old components. This market currently has been divided into two major sectors. So there was the niche sector, which is being followed a lot by Western companies. Those would be our classic cars. And then you have the commercial and logistics, which is the big ticket, let's say. The two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and then you have commercial that go for vans, light-duty trucks, minibuses, and then all the way to even tractor trailers. And just to show you, I'm going to show you a couple of the examples. Retrofitting around the world has taken off globally. I mean, as Fuse, we're also in the center, we're highlighted in the center, but there's a bunch of cars and car conversion companies that are out there, all the way from, for example, British firm Lunas, which was famously funded by David Beckham, to Everati, which does these high million dirham cars, or like $300,000 cars, specifically for niche customers. So a couple of those conversions, this is what those conversions look like. So you have, for example, on the top left-hand corner, that old Bronco that has a totally new drivetrain. This is by a company called Zero Labs. The one in the middle on top is the Ford F100 concept that actually Ford themselves did, and they're using the Mach-E powertrain, which is from their new vehicle, and they've retrofitted it to show that they can do this. So GM and Ford have already committed to building out electric vehicle conversion kits for their market so that they can retrofit faster. So this is something that's also being pushed by the companies. And then a bunch of others that are being done all across the world, including some British ones, some from the US, and a couple other regions. But India is not far behind. There are a lot of Indian players that are opening up. So you have Loop, 3V, eTrio. A lot of them are coming up with their own concepts, and they are coming up with two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler concepts that you can retrofit, and for a good price range as well. These numbers that I'm going to show you are based off the US and the UAE, but this holds just as true for Indian market. And what I'm just trying to show here is that even with a traditional, even with any powertrain that you have, you can save 20% or more using an EV retrofitted powertrain. So the total cost of ownership, which is the cost to buy the cars and factor in the depreciation of that car, the cost of fueling it, whether that's electric or whether that is petrol or diesel, and then the cost to maintain and service it is 20% lower than it is with the traditional powertrain. The beauty of this is that the retrofits can give you the opportunity to go a little lower as well, which is even better. So the more you drive, the more savings you have. Some of the examples of conversions that are being done both in India and abroad, these are actual firms that are doing it. So on the left, we have GoGo A1, which has done this 2-3-wheeler. You have Northway that's doing these, and they're doing the Tata Ace vans as well. And then you have Janus Electric on the right that's doing these big rig 18-wheelers, very common in America. So the scope of conversion is massive and it can go through all sectors. Obviously, the great thing about this is that we hit a lot of UN's social development goals. The fact that we can add to the circular economy by not only retrofitting the powertrain chassis components, but also by using used components. Because now with the amount of electric vehicles that are out there, you have a lot of these cars that you can then start using from scrap or from second life, where they may have had still good components in them, but were not able to be used because the car might have suffered bodily damage, for example. So there's a definitely big case for reuse of both components and for the vehicle itself, which happens anyway. And an interesting thing that can come out of this, a mobility as a service model, and what I like to call a conversion as a service model, is the fact that you can then convert these systems and have them be paid out on a monthly basis. And what happens there is that you're basically shifting out your OPEX, your CAPEX responsibilities to an OPEX cost. So instead of having a lump sum that you pay for a conversion, you can now start paying for it on a monthly basis. So this is a big opportunity in this market that you can realize, especially with the lower cost to get in, sort of like leasing your conversion system out. And then the maintenance and the upkeep of that system, along with the data that's given to it, is something that you can get back. The regulations around the world are catching up to this. So obviously in India, we've had a bunch of, this topic is being covered now. In Delhi, for example, there's going to be an online portal that will allow owners to retrofit vehicles, and they're estimating between 3 to 5 lakhs to be able to get these kits on a platform. Over in America, SEMA, which is the show that does custom cars, is now proposing legislation within California to have these aftermarket conversions be incentivized, which is great because then you can add and save costs on these conversions. And in the UK, they're also petitioning for these to be classified as classic cars, a new category, which then they can put down as an electric vehicle with all the benefits that they get in the UK. So the legislation is following up. And in India as well, we're making a lot of progress in this. However, there are still challenges in the sector. Obviously, at this point of time, the FAME to incentives don't apply to conversions. That's something that I know that the government is looking at. The cost is still significant, and that's mainly because of the fact that battery costs, which again, mostly sourced at the moment from China, is not as low as it could be. At new vehicle level, we're paying close to about $100 per kilowatt hour, whereas at the retrofit level, you will be 50 to twice as expensive at least. So those costs need to come down for retrofits to be then very price competitive with new electric vehicles. Safety is something that needs to be tested as well, although there are now kits that are approved by certain state authorities and the federal government. There needs to be more done to basically make them all standardized. Insurance, currently limited to third party, but something that again can be worked upon for first party. And then maintenance and warranty, obviously these retrofit firms need to offer that so as to further reduce the anxiety that people have for going after a conversion versus just buying a new EV. That's just a little overview of electric vehicles and electric vehicle conversions. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Salman. That was a great presentation. I think very thorough. I'll quickly jump on to the questions which have come. Starting from Akshay, the question is, in the absence of a standardized procedure which ensures the safety of the vehicle and the user, the acceptance for retrofits is not likely to be high. What is the way forward?
I think legislation can solve for most of these issues, because at the end of the day, the conversion process itself, once understood, is not a very complicated process. So there's not as many caveats, I would say, as probably retrofitting a petrol powertrain, which would have way more moving parts and way more customization. Standardization is something that can happen very easily in this industry. And so standardization can then aid the regulation. And I think that's the way forward for specifically that question.
Thank you. Moving on to Dharmesh, he has an interesting question to ask. He's saying, what happens to the existing ICE components?
Well, in our case, for example, those are always used in. So if the vehicle has a working ICE powertrain, usually that's donated to some other need that's needed, because when you look at any vehicle that's in mass production, let's call it like a light duty pickup truck or like a Tata Indica or something like that. There's enough of them on the road that are now non-functioning with a faulty engine or something that need that donor car to be given out. So the ICE powertrain can be retrofitted on something else. In fact, the car that we did, the powertrain from that is now being used in another Beetle. So this is a very common thing. The second thing is that, of course, you can also use components of an existing EV vehicle, which might have had body damage. So you're basically reusing what you have and you're not really wasting as much. So those questions, I think that's something that can be solved, and that is being solved.
Understood. Thank you. I hope the same has been answered to Ramesh. If you have any other question to that, please do share. I'll go on to the next one. It's from an anonymous attendee, so we don't know who it is. He's asking, please share the challenges consumers can face in after service of retrofitted vehicles. How can these be handled?
So there are two aspects to this question. I would say, firstly, electric vehicles generally have very low maintenance. So I've been driving EV for over 6 years now, and there's hardly any need for the drivetrain to be serviced because batteries don't really need, any regular kind of maintenance. Neither does the motor. So the reliability of the system is something else, and the durability of the system is something else. It's quite a durable system, but a reliability depends on who retrofits it and what kind of the quality of the components themselves. So that is something that needs to be then provided by the person that's retrofitting. So I believe people like GoGo A1 and the local Indian retrofits firms, I believe they do give you some warranty and service. And then the thing I mentioned about conversion as a service, which is like a mass model, a mobility as a service model, I think that gives way to people not having anxiety about it, because then the conversion essentially is leased. So anything, whether it's battery degradation, the range that we've promised, or any of that sort of thing, that's all on the company that's providing it. You're on a monthly sort of subscription, which again is still cheaper than running it as an ICE vehicle.
Understood. So Aishwarya has a question from, she's trying to gain a perspective as to what can India learn from UAE to encourage retrofitting ICEs.
So, I don't think India can learn a lot. I'd say India is quite far ahead in their own way. In fact, it's quite nascent as a market here. But one thing that people can learn from here is that classic cars or older cars in India can be retrofitted. And I mean, Gautam, we were talking earlier about the ambassador. That would be a prime, candidate for conversion. You had old Contessas and stuff. Those were never really that powerful to begin with. But there was, I would say, not much wrong with them if you were to convert them to from ICE to EV. So those could definitely be brought back, and then there could be work done around them. And that's something certainly that's being done in other markets. So you have, for example, the 69 Mustang being done by an UK firm called Charge Cars. Granted, they're charging a lot of money for it, but it is being done. So this is something that we can definitely utilize. That nostalgia factor, it's quite strong. So that's something that we can use to our advantage.
I couldn't agree more. So I'll come on to the next question. This was briefly covered by you, but Rajan has something more to ask. The incentives under the FAME2 policy are for the purchase of only new EVs. It does not provide for any scrappage incentive, nor does it talk about retrofitment allowance for converting existing ICE vehicles to EVs. While the Delhi government has taken some steps to encourage retrofits, what more is needed? What do you think?
I think that there needs to be a new class within the FAME2 incentives that like similar to what the UK is asking, where retrofit vehicles are also given some incentives. And I think the incentives can come from the battery level, because as I mentioned before, batteries are really the weak point here, because battery cost to us as retrofitters is very high. So if there is a possibility of getting those, especially from local suppliers, I believe 20 gigawatts is coming in online in Indian battery production by next year, by 2023. So local batteries manufacturers, if they can be incentivized by the government for EV retrofit companies, I think there we can have a really strong case to have cheaper retrofits, and for this to take a bigger market within the Indian EV space.
Understood. Thank you. I see a lot of questions pouring in, so I quickly keep coming on to one after the other. Madhu is asking, any possibilities of using structural adhesives instead of conventional methods of joining to reduce the weight of the vehicle, which can enhance the performance?
I mean, absolutely. At the moment, this is a very nascent market in most places. Even in the UK, it's only 7 years old. Which, and if you look at, vehicles have been designed for over 100 years. To your point, Tesla does do that. So Tesla's new batteries are basically joined through a structural kind of glue. Their new packs. So you're not totally wrong there, buddy. All I think that needs to be done is we need to integrate that into, let's say, retrofitting as well. But it's a complicated process because for every single vehicle, you have to reverse engineer a battery pack that will work. So I think that those kind of practices, like using structural adhesives and similar kind of advances, will come. But I think a lot of it will come through additive manufacturing. So that's both metal and polymer. And then, yes, a bit of like things like structural glue and stuff like that as well.
I'm glad having a technical person like you makes it a lot easier. Even a layman like me can also understand what you're saying. So I'll go on to the next question, which is from Sharad Kumar. He's asking, we plan to evaluate investment opportunities in EV charging stations across India. What is the market for that and what kind of minimum investment do we need to make? Sharad, I believe this is about retrofitting, but if Salman has something to say on this, I can surely give it to him. Otherwise,
I have to unfortunately say that I don't know much about the charging market in India, but I mean, I can connect you with certain people who can give you a lot more. We're working with, as I mentioned before, a couple of companies in India who are looking at retrofits, but they're also well in the know about charging stations, so they can provide that data if needed.
Sure, thank you. So Akbar is asking, how do retrofits benefit sustainability?
Well, I think I mentioned in just a short point that the circular economy aspect of it is quite strong. So there's a lot of mining that goes into creating batteries, more so than when you're talking about steel and all the other metals that go into just the chassis and the development alone. Stamping and all of these are very energy intensive, and then energy intensive on the mining. So you're removing a whole portion of it, which is the chassis bit. And so that is the saving that you have in terms of carbon footprint. You're just now putting in the battery. The other good thing is when you have something on the road, you are essentially scrapping it. So you're saving something from going into either landfill or like a recycling plant, which again consumes more energy that you're saving. So you can then bring them back. And there's an opportunity here as well. I mean, look, right now we're still early stages in EV adoption, but certainly in the years coming forward, there will be a lot of these EVs that will go through accidents one way or the other that will have good components that are certainly being used. I mean, one of the cars that we're doing, for example, the car got into an accident. The donor car, rather, the donor Tesla that we use, got into an accident. The car works 100% fine, including all the entertainment screens and everything inside. So all we had to do was basically strip the Tesla out of its core components, and now we're retrofitting those into another older car. So cases like that come up all the time, and that's basically what's going to be happening, I think, in the future as well.
Yeah, I think India has a lot of old cars. I think we should definitely use into that. So getting on to the next question by Ashish, he's asking for commercial scale retrofitting. A wide network of retrofitters need to be developed. How do you see this space developing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What has to happen basically is like in France, I think Transition One, if I'm not wrong, is a company that does exactly this. So what they do is they engineer kits for certain models of vehicles, and then they have their network of trained installers with their own in-house training program that can then retrofit the vehicles that they have under a very, very short amount of time. I'm literally talking about a couple of hours. So you walk in with a car, you go for lunch, you come back, and your car's electric. So that's what they're promising, and they're doing it already. And that's, I think, what's going to happen in India. Once the modularization of kits is very important. Once that happens, you're only going to have kit manufacturers and then an approved list of installers that could be so many garages all across India.
Thank you. So I'll just move on to the last question. It's from Rajat Jindal, an interesting one as well. How keen are original car manufacturers, OEMs, to provide retrofit services? And how do you see that as a challenge?
It's so interesting that we're seeing that happen in the US with GM and with Ford. So GM actually got delayed a little bit on their retrofit promise because they promised an EV conversion crate motor about a year and a half ago, and they still haven't. So they were like, okay, they had double a commitment and a PR release just for that. But in fact, as I showed on my slides as well, the F100 is basically a marquee that's transplanted. And Ford's Illuminator motor, which is one of their, like the motor that they use in the marquee, is something you can buy in separately just to put into retrofit kits. So therefore, so when you have GM and Ford and companies like this catering to the EV conversion market, and then you have obviously SEMA that's pushing for legalization and into the California regulations for electric vehicles, you can see there's a big both government push and a company-wide push to do this as well.
Thank you so much, Salman. I believe we do have 2 more questions, so I'll quickly get into that. Apart from the battery, which is a focal point for technology infusion, is there other technology infusion that is happening in the EV?
Yes,
which will bring additional benefits?
There are. So there are 2 major points where there can be huge benefits. Obviously, the battery, this is well documented, but also motors, because there's radial, axial, and then there's a hybrid of the 2. So the way that these work is that the magnetic flux that's within the battery, that's within the motor, it can either lead to high torque or low torque applications or high power applications, depending on the type of winding that you use. And there's a very interesting one that was developed by Koenigsegg, which is the hypercar manufacturer somewhere based out of Europe that are doing their new Gemera. And I believe that one has a pancake motor the size of a soda can. So it's about this big, right? And it's just a little bit bigger than that, maybe it's twice the height of that, and it's 300 horsepower, just purely by the way that the magnetic flux rotates around the rotor. So there is a lot of space for the motors to get a lot more compact. And depending on how you use them, high torque or high power applications, I think there's a lot can be done there as well.
Interesting. I think that was about it. If we can wait for another minute or 2, if there are any other questions. We are also getting a few, I believe Dharmesh wants to connect with you. He sent his message on the chat section as well. So if you want, you can surely reach out to him. And Sharad has really enjoyed the session with you. And
yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. I believe, that's about it. So thank you very much, Salman, for such an insightful and engaging session. It was a privilege to hear you. Our guests and I have been hooked on till the end and have taken off several nuggets. And also thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the end and for always sharing excellent questions. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you, Blue Circle team, for your time. Happy to be here, man. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.